Well, I want to welcome you to our program today. We have a special guest. Her name is Dawn Vircks. Dawn, thank you so much for being on the program today. Dawn has quite a message to share with us. She's unfortunately a person who's had to walk through the very valley of the shadow of death as she has lost a son. But this is something that so many people, I've known, well, I shouldn't say so many people, but I've known a number of people where they've lost loved ones and children, and it's considered to be the most painful grief that a person could go through. Not to try to minimize other people's grief, because we know that grief is grief. But anyway, I just want, before we get started, with a lot of this, I just want to mention that Dawn has written a book. It's entitled "Finding a Place of Peace." And it's just been recently published, and it can be purchased on Amazon.com. And so here again, maybe this can be our starting point, Dawn, as we think about, you wrote a book, okay? What brought about writing this book?
Well, this happened 20 years ago when my son decided to rob a bank in Cedar Rapids, and the police shot him, and I believe that he did it because he wanted to die, because he was depressed. Of course, that was very devastating to us, and I began to see that he was leaving clues that maybe he had planned to do this, for a while, and started to read some of the things that he'd written and journaling, and I began to see that maybe there was something else I was supposed to look at here besides just the fact that my son died. And I just felt like through a dream that God had given me like 3 times, that he was calling me to do something other than just grieve and go on with my life. And writing the book, I believe, was like the beginning of that, like writing the story, because I had a friend that helped me to get started, Rachel Swanson-Hillestead, and by working with her, it started to draw out like the words to put into place for the story, where before I'm a person that feels quite a bit, and I knew all of these things in my relationship with the Lord and how I was doing it, but I really felt like God wanted me to put it on paper. And working with Rachel helped me to be able to get that started. I had to dig deeper, and so I just always felt like it was God leading me. Probably about 3 years ago we started together, and people want to know, is that like a, did you do it because of a healing thing? And I want them to understand that I did not do it because of that. I did it because I felt like I was being obedient to God, and by going through this process of writing it, I had to dig deeper and learn quite a bit more about myself and find the words, and that's what Rachel helped me to do. I'm very thankful.
Yeah. So this book is really quite a blessing. It's a gift.
Yeah.
That hopefully as people read it, that they will, be engaged and find it to be a source of healing for their own lives as well. Because, like I said, there's so many people where they are struggling. They're struggling in their grief, and whatever that grief is. Whether it's losing a husband or a wife or parents, but losing a child, and then of course suicide, how painful that is, for parents, that when, a child takes their life and they're just really reeling, like, where do I go? Where do I turn? Where do I find any comfort? Where do I find help? And so this hopefully will be a book that can be very therapeutic for family members who are going through this, as well as friends and other people who really cared. And so now your son's name was Ryan?
Yes.
Yeah, Ryan. And so tell me a little bit about Ryan's life. What were some of the things that he enjoyed doing in life?
Well, he was a really amazing kid. He was almost 17 when he died. He was our firstborn, very talented in music and working with his hands. He was a woodworker. And he also loved the Lord. And I noticed at a very young age that he had said to me that he couldn't wait till he went to heaven. He was looking forward to that. And he seemed like, he maybe had a tendency towards a little bit of depression, maybe low self-esteem, but he also, was really important to him to learn about God. And when he was in high school, he was starting to lead Bible studies and serve his church by leading worship and music and so forth. One of the big things that he did with his youth group was to go to Mexico and help to build homes for people.
Wow.
He went with his dad, and then he was also talented in speed skating and other things, but just everybody really loved him. But I think he tended to have a little bit of depression, but I think he also started to get into alcohol and drugs, which I think really changed his thinking, and I think it really just changed things around for him. And I've read other people's stories about people, their children that had turned and done things, like Sue Kleinbolt's book. And I think sometimes people that are serving the Lord just are under attack, and I just definitely felt that with our family, that it was a spiritual attack on my son and our family. In fact, I always had felt the real strong need to pray as a family together. As Rachel had said, you kind of almost knew something was going to happen, but I didn't know what. So I believe that Ryan had planned this for a few months to rob the bank and use a fake gun. But so you asked the question, what was he like? He was very loving, and of course everyone was very shocked. The only thing that he'd ever gotten in trouble for was throwing a snowball at a school bus when he was in grade school. So, or his complaint on his report card might have been, he does not talk enough in class. So that gives you a little bit of idea.
It just sounded like a real likable young man, somebody that we all would enjoy, and somebody with a strong faith, and actually, a faith at that age that was very mature to where, reaching out, ministering, serving others. He also is very talented, like you say, musically, but also athletically, and just a likable kid, a person that we all would enjoy. But then you could see that there were, you mentioned like the spiritual attacks. That's something about people that Christians have to be aware of, is that as you're doing the Lord's work, understand that there is the opposition that's going to show up, the devil, who's going to try to do things, sometimes subtly, little by little, to bring us down. But you could kind of see some signs that there was, some depression, some self-esteem issues that, and then also, that, dabbling in some alcohol and things. So, so that sometimes can be a bad equation when that happens. And I know that a lot of youth kind of go through their stages where they're curious and experimenting and things like that. But as you looked at it, you could kind of see that there were some warning signs that that hopefully nothing bad is going to result out of this, but yet you could kind of had some worries as a mother then. Yeah, we had several discussions. It kind of hurt our relationship because I had discussed with him that I was concerned, and that I could see that he was showing signs of depression, and he would spend a lot of time trying to convince me that he was not depressed. And we did try a counselor, and I took him to the doctor, and he convinced the doctor that he was not depressed, and he just really was dead set against getting any kind of help. So it was tough. Kind of in a denial of it.
Yeah. And then people may know too, when a loved one is depressed, that oftentimes they will start to feel better when they make a plan. Well, we saw him being his happy-go-lucky self, and discuss the fact that we were concerned, that could be a sign of suicide. But, still we didn't, we're parents and we're watching over him. He seemed happy, he seemed normal, and, then, he had this plan that we did not know about. So And it's scary for people. You know, it was awful for us to go through, but I think the kids that were his age, you know, are deeply affected still to this day. Now they have their own children, and it's very, I think it's very hard for them to deal with the fact, you know, that you can have this normal family and then something like that can happen to, you know, to them or to one of their kids. I think they're very, very disturbed by it still today.
Yeah, because when you think about when he started feeling better, that you almost think that that's a good sign to say, oh, well, Ryan is kind of coming out of this, but really, because I've heard this in what research I've done with suicide, that a lot of times they will make a decision and all of a sudden there's this peace that comes over them, and or at least they have a peace about it, and then they act normal, because a lot of times people will say, well, yeah, I just saw them the night before and happy-go-lucky, like you say, and seemingly doing just fine. And so that's why it really is such a shocker, but the decision had been made sometime prior. Okay, so that's what he chose to do, was to go the avenue of robbing a bank. And then as the police show up, then he was, then the police then ended his life through by having to shoot him.
Yeah, Ryan actually forced him to. It was a very difficult situation.
Okay, well, here again, my deepest sympathies to you,
thank you.
And
appreciate it.
And very sorry about all of this, but you are a person of faith, and I can't imagine how this must have tested every little fabric of your person and of your beliefs and things like that. But when you get such a tragic, devastating news, you know, I mean, it's got to be just, well, here again, we kind of go through the stages of grief, which I think are different for everybody. But, you know, but for you, you know, I can't imagine how this must have been, but was it just, you know, as far as your faith in God, how would this have tested your faith?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Jeff. I had walked in the mornings for exercise with my neighbor lady friends, and we would oftentimes pray together. And I remember telling her, you know, that Ryan's birthday is coming up, and he doesn't know what he wants for his birthday. I think that's really odd, you know, for a teenager. And so finally I've kept asking him, and he said he wanted a mirror. And so that kind of made a red flag, you know, go off in my head. But I remember that the neighbor woman, she said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to leave him in God's hands. And I really meant that day. That I was going to leave him in God's hands. And so when he died, I remembered that I had done that, and I didn't question God. You know, I actually, you know, wanted to say, you know, well, why? You know, why did you think I could go through this, and why did you let it happen? But I knew that he would make, you know, Romans 8:28 says that he will work all things out together for good to those that love him. And I knew it. I just had absolutely no idea, you know, how he was going to do it. But as I was, had mentioned to other people, that a friend had given me this magnet that said, my grace is sufficient for you. And that was kind of my anchor, to know that, you know, God was speaking to me directly through his word, that I could make it through this. So I never really had like turned my back on God. I don't think I was as bold in my faith, because, you know, when you have something like that just hit you right in the face, you know, it's kind of scary to think, you know, that can happen to you as serving the Lord. And so, you know, I think the Lord understood that all along, and I just trusted him when he'd given me that dream. I just felt like I was this little girl putting my hand in God's hand, and saying, okay, I'm trusting you to take me to the place where you actually bring me, like where I'm at right now, because I can tell you that I'm not the person that would want to sit in front of a camera or stand in front of a microphone and talk to people to share my faith. That terrifies me, but I knew that God could do that, you know, just through an ordinary person like me. And as I was saying, that I'm not, you know, anyone special or anyone that's a good enough person to have God use me this way. I just wanted to be be obedient to him and to follow what I think he wants me to do.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my faith and how I got to where I'm at now.
It sounds like, Dawn, that you mentioned like the why, and that's the natural question of grief. You know, why? Why? We don't, and it's not like we'll ever probably totally or understand why. And even if we understood completely why, would that make us feel any better? I don't know.
Yeah.
But then you said how. You know, you said how. You know, how is God going to strengthen me in this? And you mentioned Romans 8:28 and how God has strengthened you to be, during this time. And then now, kind of the what is God, meaning that what now?
Yeah.
Is that God's that you wrote this book and are willing to speak to people and to even talk to them one-on-one because that God now has put you in a position to say, well, out of your woundedness, you can now heal. I mean, that's even what Jesus did. And, from his wounds, we are now healed. It's because of his pain that we have salvation, and how I know that God will be using you now in the midst of your pain and in the midst of your grief to minister to so many others who now are facing these very painful times as well. Well, let's take a little look at the book here, and maybe we could just talk about some of the chapters.
Okay.
Like chapter 1 is goodbye, so I imagine that's kind of explaining a little bit about, just what happened on that awful day, April 23rd, 1997, right?
Well, he wrote that on the 23rd, but the day that he died was on the 30th. Yeah, so that's actually
okay. This is a little bit
Ryan's
of a journal.
Poem. That's
His
actually
poem.
his
Okay.
poem. So that when he was missing on the evening that he died, of course, we had no idea that our son had robbed a bank. And we went up to his room just to see if there was anything that we could see before I wanted to call and report that he was missing. And we found that his room had been cleaned, and he had his stack of his school books stacked in the middle of his room, which was, of course, very unusual. And on the top of the stack of books was that poem, Goodbye.
So that's why you knew that there was more to this than just robbing a bank.
Well, it's still, you're in shock when you have something like that happen. So, there's a lot of denial. And I think it's important to note that that's my personal take, that Ryan was saying goodbye. I didn't know it at the time, but my ex-husband, doesn't believe that, he had planned it as a suicide.
Okay.
So, and other people may not, but I believe, and that's one of the reasons that I believe that, but it took me it took me a while. I remember going to the library to get some information about drug use because I wanted to see how his mind had been affected when he robbed the bank. There were no drugs or alcohol in him. He had gotten off of it, and there was nothing in his system. But I remember coming home and I had this book about this woman had written that her two sons had committed suicide at different times. And I remember thinking, how did this book get here? I thought I just had other information. And so I didn't remember grabbing a book about suicide. And as I read that, I began to think of all the things that he had said to me over the years, and the things that he said before he died. Like he said, I don't think I'm a needed member of this family. He was trying to convince me that we didn't need him in our family. And when I asked him if he was going to try out for the talent show at school, he actually said, I hope not. Or I knew he was going to try out for it, but I said, are you going to be in Moodico? And he said, I hope not. And I just thought that was the oddest answer, but I didn't know, what to make of that, so.
Yeah, and then laying Ryan to rest, it just sounds like you've written about, this whole journey of, day by day and all of the different events that, now have to take place. Losses and Blessings is the name of one of the chapters. And then you have another chapter on looking back, and one on Ryan, and then one on posthumous discoveries, and then the policeman's thoughts and memories. And there's a chapter on grieving, moving past grief and into life. Yeah, so it's like a life renewed. So I kind of get the sense that there is this journey, that you have been on, and that I imagine that pain of losing Ryan is always there, but it also sounds like there's a lot of healing that has taken place in your life.
Yeah.
Where life is going on for you. Yes. But as I look at some of these chapters, I mean, you have a chapter on, the police officer that shot Ryan. Here again, how awful all this has been for all of you, but for the police officer, I've known a lot of police officers and what they see in a day, and sometimes the things that they have to do, and how it isn't like they're just callous people that, have no feelings, but how this police officer has now had to go on in his life, and I'm sure it all compounds for him as well, but he's also mentioned in the book, and he also shares some thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah, he does. He had actually sent us a card after Ryan had died, and there was a bookmark in there about, wishing healing for us, and I share that in that chapter because I think it's really where my ex-husband and I are today with the healing, and we're just very thankful that we had an opportunity to meet with him and begin friendship and, extend our, sympathies to him and all the things that he went through. And, of course, he had agreed to meet with us, to help us, and it was a very big help, to be able to do that. But my ex-husband had always wanted to meet with him, after it happened. So he had just, faithfully been praying for that opportunity, for all these years. So we're really glad, and that happened about 3 years ago, almost 3.
Yeah. And it sounds like you also have had some good friends that have surrounded you, and how important that is in a time like this.
Yeah, and in fact, I even, mentioned that in the book, that how important that was, that we had so many people that prayed for us all these years, and pray for us now, pray for me as I'm here. And, it's just, it's such an important message, because when people are going through grief or something difficult, they tend to isolate, and, to realize that we need other people to be able to help us through difficult situations, so.
Yeah, so it sounds like your faith in God, your friendships, even talking to the police officer, that there was some healing in that. What are some other things that you can think of that, that have helped you, that have brought some healing, as far as what God has used to help get you to a place where you could write the book and now are willing to speak, but just to go on with life? Are there other things? I know that you like to exercise. I know skating was a part of Ryan's life, but it's also a part of your life as well.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I've been blessed with is understanding how much we are thinking. The way that we think has an impact on our lives, our physical health, our relationships with people. And I began to really find different ways to make a difference in how I was thinking, like the glass is half full rather than the glass is half empty, and looking at positive things in my life. Of course, Bible study being in God's Word was a huge part of that. I feel like as a result of Ryan's death, our family was broken up by divorce. That was really devastating, and you lose a lot of family members and friends that you love very much. But I see now how God has built back up that friendship and with other people, and how He's surrounded me with a good support system. So that's really helpful. But I think, searching for ways to know God more and to think in a more positive way about your situation and your health, and just is like a really important thing. That's what helped me, I think, quite a bit.
It just sounds like a lot of the support system, they allowed you just to be you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because obviously, a grief that makes you very tender. Yeah. Well, this is Dawn Vircks, and she has written a book, Finding a Place of Peace, and it's a wonderful book. I would highly encourage all of you to buy it and to read it. She shares a lot about losing, her very dear son Ryan in a tragic event where he robbed a bank, but then in the process was that he was shot to death by a police officer, but also kind of sensing that this really was a setup, to take his life. And so the pain that Dawn and her family and friends have had to go through at this time. And so Dawn has written a book that I think can be very therapeutic for all of us, but also she is willing to go out and to speak, to speak to, the groups, any kind of an organization that would want to have you speak, but also somebody that probably be just willing to go and sit down as an individual to talk to people. And we'll have her information here up on the screen as we've been having. And also here again, if you'd like a copy of her book, that it can be purchased on Amazon.com.
Yes.
Yeah. And so that's something that we are very thankful. It's always, a lot of times people are just saying, well, where can we find some resources and people who are willing to kind of be the wounded healer, to say, out of my woundedness I will heal. And so Dawn is certainly one of these people. Okay, well, I just want to thank you so much. I really admire your courage.
Well, thank you.
And the journey that you have been on, the journey to healing, and how God has used this, like you say, to bring forth something good, and something good in honor of our Lord, but also in memory of Ryan. And so we know that God will be with you and be blessing you as you go forward, as you continue this journey of healing. So thank you for sharing and being on our program today, and I want to thank all of you for joining us this day as well.